is one of those touchy subjects. Touchy not because the Word of God makes it touchy, but because mindsets, popular or not, within today's culture, make this an uncomfortable subject. It's made uncomfortable because it involves confrontation. It involves, first of all, step one in this confrontation, the pastor coming before you and confronting all of you in our congregation with this subject matter. It then involves me confronting others who listen outside of our congregation, either through YouTube or on the website, for me to confront them with this subject. Now, as you're looking at your outline there in your bulletin, you're looking at the title and you're going, really? Okay. The title is To Marry or Not to Marry. So it sounds like we're going to be getting instructions on whether I should get married or not. Nope, that's not it. That's a sort of by the way sort of subject. The topic under consideration today really has to do with authority and submission. Oh, here we go. He's going to tell how that the wife better get herself underneath that husband. But no, I'm not going to do that at all. That is not the issue. The issue goes deeper than that. The issue is touchier than that. The issue has to do, first of all, with what's going on in your home, dads, fathers, husbands. The issue has to do with how you and your wife sit and stand in agreement on this subject or not. And we best get in agreement on this subject or we're going to have trouble with God, especially if you have daughters. If you have daughters. Now, for some, a subject like this, relative to the submission of daughters to their fathers in particular, relative to the type of interpersonal relationships that they have, who they go out with, so to speak, who they get engaged to, and propositioning for marriage and that kind of a thing, has everything to do with getting them used to this idea from the very beginning, raising them in this understanding, the biblical understanding, so that when they get into the teenage years, you do not have this surprise confrontation. They already know what's coming, and hopefully what you've got is you've got a daughter who has responded to the gospel as you have raised her in it and has been brought to church, heard the gospel, raised in it by mom and dad. They've heard the word at home, and God graciously has caused them to be able to respond to the gospel message, and they're walking with the Lord. In which case you've got a gem of a situation there, and this is easy because they will want to submit to the Word of God and will want the oversight and protection of their fathers. Now, on the other hand, you may be coming into this in the middle of the road, much like I did with one of my daughters, a stepdaughter, and it was a kind of a tough go here because she wasn't raised with that. It was a different situation. She got the gospel later on in her life, so it was a little tougher in that regards. Maybe you're in a situation where you're saying, well, I don't know, I can go to sleep now because this doesn't really pertain to me. I got no daughters, or I've got no daughters at home, or Bessie has left the barn, so now we're going to work on fixing the gate door. You would be surprised how that the Lord will open up opportunities for you to be a vehicle of the Word and to share this with other Christians, other parents. You might be in a position where maybe some Christian parents would come to you or give you the opportunity to say, do you understand? Can you talk to our daughter about this? Can you? And you'll have the word ready to go. You never know. You may need to help your already married daughter with little kids begin to understand this and to begin to teach this to them. In other words, nobody is off the hook when it comes to this subject. To Marry or Not to Marry, subtitled, A Father's Authority Over His Daughter. Where are we getting that from? Well, it comes from verses 36, really down through 40, the end of chapter 7 right there. Let's read the text together. It says, But if any man thinks that he is acting unbecomingly towards his virgin daughter, if she is past her youth, and if it must be so, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let her marry. But he who stands firm in his heart, being under no constraint, but has authority over his own will, and has decided this in his own heart, to keep his own virgin daughter, he will do well. So then, Both he who gives his own virgin daughter in marriage does well. He who does not give her in marriage will do better. A wife is bound as long as her husband lives. But if her husband is dead, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But in my opinion, she is happier if she remains as she is, and I think that I also have the Spirit of God. Now, this issue of authority in interpersonal relationships, husbands over wives, fathers over daughters, parents over their son, is only in place because of you know what, because of what happened in the garden, because of the fall in particular. Genesis 3:16 immediately places Eve directly under Adam's authority when he says, your desire shall be towards your husband, and essentially you will have to submit to him. That is a part of the fallen situation. What is fascinating to me is that that has never been removed. You get out of the Old Testament, you get into the New Testament, even post-cross, post-resurrection, and it's not removed. Paul continues to speak about it, for instance. We'll just touch on it as we're going along here. Paul brings up the place and the responsibility of Eve, for instance, in the fall, to Timothy relative to whether a woman is allowed to teach a man in church or not. And that's found in 1 Timothy 2, verses 11 through 15, where Paul says, I do not allow a woman to teach or usurp the authority over the man, but she is to be in a tranquil position of silence and a position of learning. Now that's in the church. It's improper for a woman to be in a teaching position in the church. Doesn't mean she can't teach or share outside of that. You got different examples of that in the Old and the New Testament. But in the church, it is not to be. Why is that? Well, Paul says, because Adam was first formed and then Eve, and it was not the man who was in the transgression, it was the woman. And so to the woman and all her female progeny falls this position of authority and submission underneath her husband. You say, what if she's not married? Then it's underneath her father. What if there is no father anymore? Then if she is a believing woman, then she comes under the headship of the elders in the church. Paul, here in 1 Corinthians, will soon give the order of headship in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 3 through 12. Rather than me reading through these passages and taking all that time, I will trust that you will do that. But he talks about the fact that God is the head over Christ, Christ is over the man is over the woman, and so forth. And there is that umbrella effect that begins to get spoken to in regards to positioning of families, Christian families in particular, in the church. He also brings it up in Ephesians, the 5th chapter, Ephesians 5, verses 22 through 25. Where he speaks about how wives are to submit to their own husbands, and husbands, by the way, are to love their wives. How? Exactly, you got it. Like as Christ loves the church. That is a tall order, isn't it, gentlemen? We have a lot to be aware of when it comes to the basis for our wives submitting to us. If there's a problem with submission in a couple's home, one of the first things I do, I don't go after the wife. I go to the man. Say, what's your problem there, buddy? What is it? Are you loving her like Christ? Well, yeah, I love her like Christ loved the church. Shoot, I get her this or get her that. No. Christ laid down his life for her. Give me an example of how you laid down your life for your wife today. Tell me now. See what I mean? Suddenly it's you know. Yeah, so there's the basis for that. But the authority and submission structure still stands, and it's one example after the next. Now, what about children in general in regards to submission? In the home, children are to submit and to obey both parents, Paul says. Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 3. Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 3. And, of course, the command of honoring mom and dad is applied there by Paul, along with the promise that if you do that, you will live long on the earth. So there is a promise of the extension of life to our children who submit themselves and obey mom and dad. That's a powerful thing, and I never tire of speaking about that. All right, so we've been hearing little bits of hints towards the idea that the daughter is to be under the father. We're going to get more into that, as you can see, after we have read that text. But what about the son? What if I got a son? Doesn't he have to submit to dad too? Actually, there are no texts that speak about that. There is this Ephesians 6, 1 through 3 that I just gave you. There is the commandment to honor mom and dad. But it's interesting because when Jesus talks about a son leaving the home of mom and dad and establishing his own home when he marries his wife, that really is what all the Bible really says in regards to that matter. This area of a father really covering and protecting his daughter relative to whether she's going to even get married or not, or who she's going to marry and when she's going to marry, that is given quite a bit of attention in both the Old and the New Testament. But as far as the son goes, that's covered in Matthew 19, verses 5 through 6. You're probably familiar with that. Allow me to just touch on it for a moment here. Matthew 19, verses 5 through 6. Jesus said, quoting Genesis, "For this reason a man," that's the son, "shall leave his father and mother, join to his wife, the two shall become one flesh. So then, they're no longer two, but one flesh. What God has joined together, let no man separate." So there is the leaving of one home under mom and dad, and there is the marriage, the joining together of the man with his wife, and now a new home is established. Now the son, instead of being in submission to mom and dad, is now the authority over his own home. That submission, that position of submission under mom and dad is essentially broken at that point, because now he is the one that is in authority. And that's what the Bible has to say in regards to the son, in case that thought was to ever come up. But in the subject of marriage and who the son is to marry, it's not spoken directly to in Scripture as to a son submitting to his parents over this. That is covered. However, the subject of a father's daughter being in direct submission to the father as to who and when she will marry is spoken to directly. And let's begin that study in these few verses by going back to Numbers, the 30th chapter. And you, after you've written that down, I want you to locate the 30th chapter of Numbers and watch this. Because essentially Paul is piggybacking right off of these central thoughts here in Numbers, the 30th chapter, as he speaks about it in 1 Corinthians 7, verses 36 down through verse 39 in particular. Now this 30th chapter of Numbers has to do with vows that a married woman would take, or that the daughter of her father would take, and whether they have any binding authority. Watch the wording here, all right? Numbers, the 30th chapter. We're going to read this quick, so watch. "Then Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes of the sons of Israel, saying, This is the word which the Lord has commanded." So this is a commandment. This is not a suggestion, okay? Verse 2, "If a man makes a vow to the Lord, or takes an oath to bind himself with a binding obligation, he shall not violate his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth." Okay, simple enough. 3, "Also, if a woman makes a vow to the Lord and binds herself by an obligation in her father's house in her youth." Did you catch that? In her father's house in her youth. So she's in submission to her dad, who's not married yet. "And her father hears her vow," whatever that vow might be, "and her obligation by which she has bound herself, and her father says nothing to her, then all her vows shall stand, and every obligation by which she has bound herself shall stand." Because the father has not intervened to change that. 5, "But if her father should forbid her on the day he hears of it, none of her vows or her obligations by which she has bound herself shall stand, and the Lord will forgive her because her father has forbidden her." That includes marriage, by the way. That includes getting married. The biggest vow is that public vow that is made between a couple relative to the way God marries people, and when there is that acknowledgement. If dad is not for it, it ain't happening. You can say, "Well, we just returned from the justice of the peace and here's the paperwork," and dad says, "No." Right there before God, nothing has happened because dad's been opposed to it. In fact, you didn't go to dad for it in the first place. You didn't involve him in it. Now you immediately have problems. Let's just let this simmer a little bit and let it build to a boil. Verse 6, "However, if she should marry while under her vows, or the rash statement of her lips by which she has bound herself, and her husband hears of it, and says nothing to her on the day he hears of it, then her vows shall stand, and her obligations by which she has bound herself shall stand. But if on the day her husband hears of it, he forbids her, then he shall annul her vow which she is under, and the rash statement of her lips by which she has bound herself, and the Lord will forgive her. But the vow of a widow or a divorced woman, everything by which she has bound herself, shall stand against her. However, if she has vowed in her husband's house, or bound herself by an obligation with an oath, and her husband heard it, but said nothing to her, did not forbid it. And so you get what's going on right here, okay? You see this authority structure that is happening. If dad or the husband says nothing to stop what she has bound herself to do, what about, let's make it practical real quick. Let's say you're married, and here comes this thing in the mail from the bank, and we're going to just practically give you this here credit card. And she goes and she fills this whole thing out and sends it in, right? And they send her back this credit card or whatever, and she's got $10,000, dollars available to her, kind of thing right there. Legally, before God, she has no obligation. Better not use it or you'll be obligated. But right then and there, the husband say, "Hold it! I didn't know you did this. That's over with. I don't care if the card has your name on it and this kind of a thing. Click, click, click with the scissors right there. You're not going to do this. You should have gone to him first about something like that, because you have bound yourself in a legal transaction." The husband now has the power to void it. Now, you just complicate things if you start using the card. Then you enter into a banking system scenario relative to promises towards use and the obligation that comes in regards to use. But you see what I'm saying, just to be practical in regards to something like that. The husband says no. Now, for a woman to just say, "Well, I'm going to use it anyway, I got my own job and it's my card," you're in sin, baby. You're in sin, and God will deal with you about this. You don't want God dealing with you. That's where some of this can go practically, okay? Now, head on back to our text. Keep in mind now that in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul is now returning to the issue of virgin daughters, which he initially spoke to in chapter 7, verse 25 and 28. Look back at 25. He says, "Now concerning what? Virgins, I have no command of the Lord to give an opinion. One who is, by the mercy of the Lord, is trustworthy." And then 28, he says, "But if you marry," speaking to a man, "you have not sinned." And then he says, "And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned, yet such will have trouble in this life. I'm trying to spare you." So what's happening? Well, Paul is answering questions, isn't he? He's answering questions. And so far, we have seen several questions answered, and now the last of these questions, in regards to the 7th chapter, is now addressed. And so, as you look at your outline, let's consider, first of all, as we get into verse 36, that a father's authority should not be unreasonable in this regards. Now, watch how the wording works here in verse 36. By the way, you might be wondering, did we go verse by verse through verse 32 all the way through 35? Well, if you'll remember, for about the last 3 or 4 weeks, I have been making references and application references to those verses. And I've decided not to repeat a whole lot of stuff that I've already said. I consider those verses done at this point, and yet I will make some references back to them because they are part of what we will be talking about today. Just in case you were wondering about that. All right, now watch 36. "But if any man thinks that he is acting unbecomingly towards his virgin daughter, if she's past her youth, and it must be so, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let her marry." So what's happening here is that both father and daughter need to bring verses 32 through 35 into consideration here, whether or not the daughter is going to get married. Because 32 through 35 is basically Paul saying what? Here are the benefits for staying single, right? Here are the benefits. You're free from concern if you're a single gal. In other words, the gal who's married is concerned about the things of the world, the things concerning pleasing her husband. But the gal who is unmarried can be totally given over to the Lord. He says in verse 34, she can be holy or set apart in body and spirit, which if she's married, she's not set apart 100% to the Lord in body and spirit. Now, Paul's not saying one is necessarily spiritually better than the other, but he is giving his opinion, and I think his opinion is under the direction of the Holy Spirit, that it is more beneficial to be in a single state relative to being able to pay maximum attention to the Lord. There is the benefit to that. But now remember this, please, please, please. As he makes comments about this, he's also said something else from verses 26 through 31, which we need to mix into this, and this is what we taught on last week. One of the reasons he's saying what he's saying in regards to being single and the benefits therein has a lot to do with, number 1, verse 26, there is a present distress, right? Present distress, and then the time has been shortened, verse 29, yes? And then verse 31, the world's form is passing away. And we went over this in detail with you last week. Hopefully you are convinced, as I am, that this is talking about nothing else except the second coming of Christ. This is what, and that's why I took you back into the coordinating passages that speak in regards to this. So we've got a specific historical situation that's going on here that is part and parcel of why Paul is saying some of the things he is saying. So we have to bring that into the mix too, okay? That's part of doing good study, good exegesis right here. We just don't want to take passages and just slap them down on people today and say, this is what you're supposed to be doing, and without taking into consideration, why did Paul make these statements? Well, he's answering questions that they were asking him specifically about their lives at that time, just prior to the second coming, in which they were expecting to experience that second coming motif. And so what is life going to be like while we're waiting up to that moment? And what's life going to be like after he comes back? See? And that's part and parcel of what we're dealing with today as well. So now looking at verse 36, if any man thinks he is acting unbecomingly to his virgin daughter, you notice that the word daughter, if you have a New American Standard in verse 36, is italicized, because the translators are understanding that what is being discussed here is a father with his daughter, with his virgin. He refers to her as his own. It is his virgin. And of course, we've already seen this word before, Parthenon. It's feminine. She is a maiden of marriageable age is the idea behind that. Okay, and so he's looking at her, and he's thinking, am I acting, verse 36, in a way that is unbecoming towards my daughter? Am I being askimoneo? Am I allowing her to be in a position of disgrace? New American Standard says unbecoming. It's a position or to suffer disgrace. Now, what's happening with that? Well, in this culture, in the Greco-Roman culture in particular, it was considered an unbecoming, disgraceful thing for a virgin daughter to be continuously staying in mom and dad's home as she gets past 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and the years are rolling on, and what's the problem here? How come she's unmarried? Why is she still in mom and dad's house? Is there something wrong with her? That whole thing. So there was part of this disgrace thing that was having to be dealt with right here. And he's like, oh my gosh. But now as we read through this context, something else begins to unveil itself. We begin to see that this virgin daughter of this daddy, there's a guy in the picture. She's got a fiancé. There's a kind of engagement that's going on right here. But as we read through the text, we see, oh, you know what? It looks like Dad, remember our context now, the verses just before this. It looks like Dad has vowed her over to the Lord for a single life. And now Dad is asking this question, okay, I've done this, but now there's this guy, and they've fallen in love, and they want to get married. And now I'm stuck in this struggle right here. Dad is saying to Paul in his question, do I let this happen, or should it stand? In other words, it sounds to me, and we're reading between the lines here based upon what we have, it sounds to me that there's been some instruction on Numbers, the 30th chapter, to the Corinthians by Paul, at least to some degree. Because where did this dad get this idea that there was a binding and a stopping and a vow that now he would like to change because there is this couple. And is there not maybe the danger? The two of them are together, they're in love. She's older now, the text says. They're together, and it's like, what is the danger? If they don't get married, what's the danger? I'm asking you. They're together now, they're adults, they're in love. If they don't get married, what's the danger? There, bingo. Porneas, fornication. Keep that in mind as we are going through this right here. So Paul is answering this specific question from a father. As an older daughter, she's still at home, but now what you do get from this is that the daughter is obviously willingly submissive to the father, but she has this fiancé. Now, back to verse 36. Any man thinks he is becoming unbecomingly towards his virgin daughter. Now, this next phrase, if she is past her youth. Now, I disagree with that translation, and I'm not alone in this. If she is past her youth. The Greek there, that phrase is from a single Greek word. Uperkamos. Uperkamos. Now, uperkamos, it's an adjective, so it describes a thing. But you'll notice that the phrase here is given in the feminine. If she is past her youth, uperkamos is masculine. It's masculine. So what is this right here? There's some interpretive issues that are involved with this, which I've elected not to take time to go into with you because it would take a lot of time. But what I would recommend for you to do is you can, if you don't have it, get a couple of commentaries on 1 Corinthians, or you could get yourself a copy, and you'll be hearing more about this from me and from the members of the session. Get yourself a copy of the Net Bible. The Net Bible. It's called the New English Translation, Net for short. And you read the notes, the translator's notes here, and they discuss the different translators and theological options that are out there relative to interpreting this passage. Now, I take the position that what is being discussed right here has to do between a father and his daughter, and that the daughter has a fiancé, that there's a young man in the picture. I get that from the context. That's my position that I take from this, and I'm very happy to take it. I think it is exactly what Paul is speaking to here. But there's a couple of other options out there. And so if you, for instance, read the Net translation on this, or if you read the New International Version, you will see them. It sounds like Paul is now talking, according to the New International Version, that Paul is talking to a guy about deciding whether he's going to follow through and marry his fiancée or not, or whether he's going to keep her his virgin. It's very weird what comes out. This is weird. Yeah, we're talking about a guy who agrees to marry a girl, but then doesn't want to do it, and that Paul is telling him, you can do it or don't do it. You can keep her a virgin, but you still have this weird, we're engaged kind of relationship, and no follow-through is done. I kid you not. That's how the New International Version comes across. But it's an interpretive grid kind of reason that they go through in regards to that. Well, wrong is wrong. And it's way wrong, okay, in regards to this. It just doesn't make any sense, and I'll show that to you as we're moving through this. Right here, for instance, even our New American Standard has got a wrong use, I believe, in regards to the gender situation. Right? Now, when perakmos is in reference to a man, and here it is in the masculine version, then what it should be translated as is this. It should be not if she is past her youth. It should be if he has strong passions. That's how you would translate it if perakmos is in the masculine. If he has strong passions. Now, I'm not alone in this. Darby's translation translates it that way. The English Standard Version, the ESV, translates it that way. Go. The New Living Translation, which is not a bad translation, by the way, not to be confused with the original Living Bible. That's toilet paper. That's right there next to the Message. Baby. But the New Living Translation has it that way. The New Revised Standard Version has it that way. So does the Old Revised Standard Version. So I'm not alone in this. That's kind of nice for once, huh? But what you've got here is the subject of a long-term engagement that seems to be what's been going on in this case. Well, now we've got a problem Because look at verse 9, chapter 7, verse 9. Look what Paul says. If they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it's better to marry than to burn with passion. Well, guess what's happening here? If you take that, verse 9, and you look back over to verse 36, the father is like acting unbecomingly towards his virgin, keeping her in the house. And then it says, but if he has strong passions, and it must be so, let him, now the let him refers back to the father, do what he wishes, he does not sin. Let her marry is not right either. We'll cover that in just a second. But notice how that we've got now a young man who is wanting sexual relationships, and now they can't have it because they're not married. And so Paul is counseling this man to all of us about what needs to happen. So the issue of the possibility of fornication is now on the table. Best for them to get married. Look back at chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Now concerning the things about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to touch opto, a woman, in a sexual sense. And then that comes out in verse 2. But because of fornications, each man is to have his own wife. Each woman is to have her own husband. So how do you stop fornication? Get married. Now, that's not just knee-jerk every time, like, well, a young couple comes to me and says, Pastor, we just feel like, blah, so we better get married. I'm like, yeah, we better get you married right now. Oh, no, hold on a second. We got a lot of stuff to do before we reach that. So I'm not saying you just jump to that, but that is part of it. In order to avoid the sin, and we have to be concerned about that this young couple is not being left in a position where they could sin against God by being tempted into this. Well, they should just have self-control. Well, Paul says that there are some people that can't exercise self-control. And so the answer is marriage, if you're in a position where you can be married. So let him get married. By the way, I am not a believer in long engagements. When I hear about something like that, I think, number one, the whole engagement thing, it's not ordered by God in the Scripture. A lot of things concerning marriage, as you know, that our culture does, has nothing to do with God. It's just folderol. God is the one who brings the couple together, and He's the one who marries them. He's the one who says who is husband and wife. Jesus taught that. Who God joins together, let no man put asunder. God does the joining. You can go all justice of peace, stand before Rabbi Shlomo, stand in front of, Pastor Burks or whatever, and they wave their arms and they go, by the power vested in me. Well, that's a bunch of crap. And you know that because I've told you that before. Let me just reiterate that. It's a bunch of nonsense. Only God can marry. But people have to be involved in this. Elders of the church need to be involved with this. The parents, both sides, need to be involved with this, but the father of the daughter is king in this matter, whether it's going to follow through with or not. Now watch how he builds on this. Verse 36, he says now, okay, if he has strong passions about it, if it must be so, see, they need to get married, then let him, the father, do what he, the father, wishes. He does not sin, not let her marry. The Greek is gagametosan, and it means let them marry, because it's a plural. Let them marry, see? So it's not talking about a guy with his fiancée who's trying to decide if he's going to follow through and marry her or not, or keep her just like she is in an unmarried state. No. It's not let her marry, it's let them marry. So there's a father involved here. See how the context makes it clear? And the Greek just makes it, comes right out, clarity. The problem happens when we start bringing this information in from outside and all that kind of a thing. So the father here in verse 36 is not to be unreasonable about this. He sees that they're in... His daughter's older. Now, there's this young man involved. They're in love. They want to get married. Now we got a danger of fornication. So let's not be unreasonable about this, Dad. If there's no other legitimate grounds, biblical grounds or reasons why they shouldn't get married, Paul says to this couple right here in first century Corinth, that's who he's talking to the father, he says, you're not sinning, Dad. meaning that father had already, vowed his daughter over to the Lord. Now she's fallen in love. Paul's saying, you haven't sinned. Let them marry. Let them get married. So it's like, oh man, I feel so much better. If you're the father now you've got the apostles' word on this, and things are good. Because here's the deal, which brings us to the second point, is that a father's authority really, really is a heart matter. He is not to be, biblically, exercising some sort of heavy-duty, heavy deal where he's saying to the daughter, you're my daughter, I'm your father, I'm in charge here. As long as you live in my house and under my roof, you do what I say. That is not it. And by the way, I know we've all done that or have been tempted to do that as dads, okay? But watch Paul's expression now here about this situation. Verse 37. Tell me how many times the word heart shows up, right? But he who stands firm in his heart, being under no constraint, but has authority over his own will, and has decided this in his own heart, to keep his own virgin daughter, he will do well. But he who stands firm in his heart, estiken is our Greek word, he who holds his ground. He who holds his ground, perfect tense, by the way. It's also the word that is used for the idea of mooring a ship to the dock. The ship has been moored to the dock, right? It stands firm. It's talking about a father now, on the other hand, who's decided not to let the marriage go through. Now, this is a heart matter. How many times does the word heart show up in this verse? Yeah, 2 times, okay? So here's my question to you. Based on the context, based on everything we've read so far, what is the father standing firm in? Number 1, the father is standing firm in the fact that he has decided that under verse 26, the present distress, so now we got a historical situation here, right? He's decided under the present distress that he wants to keep his daughter from, verse 28, having trouble in this life. Having trouble in this life. Number 2, the father has decided to keep his daughter, verse 32, free from concern. See how all this chapter works together into the end right here? He's decided to keep her free from concern. Number 3, he has decided to, verse 35, secure for his daughter undistracted devotion to the Lord by saying no to her marriage. Yeah. That's what Paul's been building on here. Now, Paul, we've seen it elsewhere. He's not opposed to marriage. He's saying there's something to consider under the present distress and the present circumstance because the time has been cut short. That doesn't necessarily mean that this kind of a thing goes on century after century after century. Now, there might be a circumstance, if you're living in a place where there's outright persecution going on, and you can't be public about your Christianity, or if the government thinks, you're single kind of a thing, and the government controls all of this, and you don't want them knowing about there could be circumstances where you would implement some of this. Right now, at this moment, some of this doesn't necessarily have to be implemented. But what I do want you to see is this, is that the heart of this dad is for his daughter. The heart of this dad is for his daughter. And he's trying to protect her under the circumstances. And so as much as she probably doesn't want to hear this, and the assumption is that she's a Christian girl, as you see, her reaction to this stuff, the assumption is that in any case, that it's going to hurt. It's going to be hard. She's in love with this guy, right? But now Paul is saying, but if there's a dad here at the church at Corinth, who is, verse 37, standing firm in his heart, right? He's standing firm in his heart. And he's under no constraint, one way or the other. And in his heart, for his daughter's sake, he possesses this authority over his own will. But he's making a very difficult decision from his heart, it says. He's decided to keep his daughter in a single state. I mean, look at the whole verse. He who stands firm in his heart, being under no constraint. He doesn't have to go one way or the other. He could say yes, he could say no. He has the ability to do that, but he's weighing it out. But he has authority over his own will. He's not going to be talked into this by the young man that wants to marry his daughter, by the young man's family that thinks this is just such a good idea. But Dad, who knows his daughter and is looking out for his daughter, and is going to give her something. Because really, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a gift. He's saying to her, honey, I'm going to say that even though society and culture says you should be married X, Y, and Z, especially in our culture today, you go to the average church, and if there's like a singles group, that's like the lepers group in the congregation. You know, it's like, what's wrong with it? We got this group of people over here. There's something wrong with them. Look, they're all kind of like not attached. And so we stick them in the singles group. You know why the singles group exists, right? To get you attached. So you'll meet somebody. To hell with that. Oh my gosh. What an appeasement to the flesh. What a fleshly appeasement that is. God needs your help. See, that's why there's so many divorces. Because we're trying to help God out. God does it. God does it. And then how do we know God does it? Ready? Ready? The elders acknowledge it, so the elders are involved. Her father is in agreement. That is huge. But the assumption is, doesn't mean across the board that that's true. The father's got to be a believer, and he's got to be a disciple, a student of the Word, and knows what the Word is, and is a prayer man. He's a P-man. He's a prayer man. He's tight with the Lord. And he's been seeking God about who his daughter is going to wed since before she was born. And has prayed that way ever since. And then he's involved. Well, then we got a situation here. Then we got the acknowledgement from God that this is what God is doing. Now, does that automatically guarantee that the marriage is going to be a 100% success and that there will never be any trouble, there'll never be a divorce? Well, you know, of course, that is not the case because we're dealing with two separate individuals here. Both of them have the law of sin within them. They may be Christians, but the principle of sin, Romans 7:23, is still in them, and they got their flesh thing going on just fine. It's all polished up. Right? But look at this. Here's what he's doing for her. He's giving her a gift. It's a beautiful box, and it's wrapped with a beautiful bow. And inside, it's the gift of being totally concerned about the things of the Lord. Verse 32. It's verse 34. She is totally, in her body and her spirit, totally given over to the Lord. He is giving her a gift of secured, undistracted devotion to the Lord, and she doesn't have to live under the pressure of the expectation of getting married. So this is a part of what Paul is talking about right here. It's not true in every case. It's available for some. When was the last time you heard a teaching like this? Who's ever heard a teaching like this before? Thank God there's Messiah Reformed Church. Thank God. There are so many things that are just ignored out there. But if you will go verse by verse through this stuff, all of this beauty will start to come out. Most Christians don't know anything about a teaching like this. They don't. And they're all going to the big giant churches. I know it sounds like sour grapes time from Berks. No. Because you know how I feel about large churches. You can keep them. But all the people go, and they're hearing what they want to hear. They're getting what they want. Now here I come, and I start doing this to you fathers, and you granddads. That would include me. And here's the pressure that we're under. And now some of us are like, well, I didn't have that. Some of us dads, I didn't know this teaching, when I was raising my kids. Oh, I wish I did. Gosh, I blew it. Relax. Be at peace. Grace. A lot of us didn't know. It comes later. But for those of us, I'm thinking about Joanna. Right? And our little one, look, little Sierra over here, right? What a fabulous opportunity now. Now don't start thinking, ladies, that I'm saying to all the dads, when that guy shows up, you make sure you kick him real hard in the rear end so he doesn't ever come back and mess around with your daughter again. I'm not saying that. It's just that here is the emphasis in this text that we're studying today. This is a part of it. Now, daughters, don't be all afraid like, what's my dad going to do if he hears a sermon like this? Man, what are you afraid of? You're always thinking the worst, right? I want you to see the gift that this is for the young lady who's a believer in Christ, covered and loved by her father enough for her father to go against social order and cultural mores and say, honey, I release you to a life completely devoted to Christ. It's a gift, I'm telling you. It says that he decides, bottom of 37, in his own heart to keep his own virgin daughter, he will do well. Tereo, our Greek word for keep right there. And yes, it means to keep, to guard, this kind of a thing. It also means, tereo, also means to pay attention. He's paying attention to his daughter. It can also mean, the phrase tereo can be to hold something in reserve. You know, you hear people talk about they got their savings account and that is the nest egg, right? This is the holy deal. We don't touch kind of a deal. Well, here the father is treating his virgin daughter like this nest egg soda. She's being held in reserve. It means to maintain her. It's maintaining her. He's decided in his own heart to maintain his virgin daughter. And Paul says he will do well to do that. Kalos poisai. It means to perform very well, as a matter of fact. Which brings us to the third point on your outline. And that's a father's authority always results in the best outcome. If the father is walking with the Lord, is a student of the Scripture, a man of prayer, then his authority will result in the best outcome. Now, verses 37 through 38 assume that the father's daughter is in trusting submission to her father. That's the way this works. Now, verse 38 together. So then, both he who gives his own virgin daughter in marriage does well. He who does not give her in marriage will do better. So you've got a good situation either way. Keep in mind the historical background to these statements. There is a present distress. The time has been cut short. The world is passing away. Okay? Keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. It says, he who gives his own virgin daughter in marriage. Now that's gamizo. We've got a historical present going on there. It's a masculine singular, so it's he who gives. It means one who gives in marriage. Now that's important. It does not mean one who gets married. So this idea that this is about a guy who's engaged to this gal, and he's deciding whether to marry her or not, that doesn't fly with the Greek at all. He who gives his own virgin daughter. Well, who's that? Yeah, that's dad. That's the father. Makes it awfully clear, does it? It says that he will do well. Okay, now how is the father doing well by authorizing the marriage of his daughter? Well, first of all, according to chapter 7, verse 2, he's preventing fornication from going on. That's a good thing, I'd say, since it's a sin, and no fornicator will enter into the kingdom of heaven. He's already said that, 1 Corinthians 6. So that's a positive thing. Also, verses 8 through 9. I say to the unmarried, to the widows, that it's good for them to remain even as I. But if they do not have self-control, let them marry. Better to marry than to burn with passion, because it leads to fornication. So that's a good thing. He's doing well in regard. Now, there's more to it than just that, okay? But he is stopping his daughter from being in a position of being unbecoming in regards to her social status in that society in particular. So she's not in that disgraceful position of continuing to live in the house, living under mom and dad's roof, and the negatives that come in regards to that. So that's a part of it as well. That's how he is doing well for her in this regards, he says. Now, middle of verse 38. It says, but he who does not give her in marriage will do better. And now why would a father give his daughter the gift of a single life, and why is it better? Why is that single life better in Paul's mind? Well, 3 reasons. Number 1, so that she can be free from the concerns of the world. And the concerns of the world being marriage. It really is something, isn't it, today, in regards to churches and other Christians? You're like a leper if you're single. It's like, what's wrong with you? It's almost like there's greater acceptableness. Is that a word? Acceptableness? There's a greater acceptability. Let's go with that because I'm comfortable with that. There's a greater acceptability if you've been married and then divorced than there is if you're, a 30-year-old guy or gal and you've never been married. It's like, dude, or dudette, as the case may be. What the heck, kind of, hey, we got the the single group right over here. You might want to join that. He's freeing her from the concerns of the world. Number 2 reason why it's better. So she can be completely set aside or holy to the Lord in body and spirit. Paul considered this a plus. He considered this a benefit. Now, I've known some Christian widow ladies in my past, in the ministry as a pastor, who their husband had passed. And you know what they did all day? Man, they were in the Word and they were in prayer. And they're praying for me. And it made a difference. See? And they were giving themselves over to the things of the church. They never miss a, never miss a show. They never miss a study, a Bible study, a worship service. Man, they were there. They were involved in everything. And you know how they spent their days? In the Word and in prayer. And doing for others. That's a killer woman. That is a woman with a capital W. Capital womb and. That's it. The third way that it's better is so she might have the benefit of a life that is undistracted in her devotion to the Lord. So you can see that's verses 32, 33, verse 34, verse 35. All of this comes into play. So it always works out better. Dad's decision will out itself in the right way. This brings us to the 4th and final point. How's that for speed, huh? 4 points. I'm on the 4th one right now. Don't worry, I'll slow it down and keep you here for another hour. A father's authority and the death of his daughter's husband. Yes, I've been waiting for this. Kill that guy. That's how we get rid of him. Yeah. Now, here's the deal. That brings us to 39 and 40. Let's read it. A wife is bound as long as her husband lives, but if her husband is dead, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But in my opinion, she's happier if she remains as she is, and I think that I have the Spirit of God. So what we've got here is Paul is either continuing the subject of the father and daughter scenario, or he's answering a new question. And the subject is kind of being changed. I don't think the subject is being changed because, I like context. I think what's happening here is he's continuing on with the father-daughter marriage situation, but now he's answering a question that's in connection to that. Like, well, okay, what if I have my daughter marry this guy, okay, and then, but what, let's say he's a soldier or something. I don't know. What if he gets killed? Or what if he's got a dangerous job? What if he dies? What happens to my daughter then? Now she's a gal that's been married, but now she's a widow, and who wants that? It's that kind of situation. I think that's the kind of question that is happening here. I could be wrong, but it seems to fit the context best. So I'm going with that. So notice verse 39 with me. It says, a wife is bound as long as her husband lives. Well, now, a wife, who's that? Well, that's the top of 38. So then both he who gives his own virgin daughter in marriage does well. Okay, she's a wife now. See, that's how I think the context is working. She's a wife now. And so verse 39, a wife, because she's been given in marriage, according to verse 38, she's bound to her husband as long as he lives. Now the word there for bound, that's deo in Greek. You could write it down as D-E-O. Deo, put a little accent mark maybe over the O kind of a thing as you do your transliteration. It means to be tied to a thing, a someone, a person. Clearly this is in reference to marriage, isn't it? I mean, you can see this in the context. This is a no-brainer. It's the same root word that's used over, by the way, in verse 15. And you should note that, verse 15, where Paul says, "Yet if the unbelieving one in the marriage, chorizo, divides themselves from that person," right? Remember that teaching? "Then let him chorizo. The brother or sister is not under" what? Bondage. Same root word that's used here that is now used over in verse 39. So by the way, one of the ways we can interpret what the bondage is in verse 15, in case somebody says, well, what is that? Bondage to what? It doesn't really say bondage to the marriage, kind of a thing. Even though the context is pretty clear, nevertheless, not everybody is able to see this because they've got ulterior motives when they read the Scripture. Oh, who does that? Oh, gosh, I don't know. But in any case, one of the ways we can know this is bondage to the marriage is Paul uses the same word in verse 39. A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives. Now, keep in mind, and when you read a passage like this, a wife is bound to the husband as long as he lives, but if her husband is dead, she's free to be married. I've actually had guys say to me, this is God's word on the matter. Marriage is to be absolute for the rest of your life, and the only way that a woman can get remarried, and they'll take you right to verse 39, is that his guy's got to die. There's guys out there right now. Isn't it great that the Lord has given us much more information than that narrow-minded point of view? Isn't it fabulous what God has done? How He frees people up? Because you know what men want to do with God? They want to bring you under bondage to their conception of Him, and they want to rule over you. That is men for you in regards to religion. And what better way to do it than in regards to the most interpersonal, personal aspect of your life, and that is marriage. If I can bring you under that, man, I can really control you and feel good about myself because I'm controlling you, sort of a situation. No. The marriage cannot be unbound unless, and there are several things that we have seen so far that can unbind it. Number one, we've already seen, if the husband does not fulfill his place sexually to his wife, that breaks it, because that's a form of porneos. That's a form of unfaithfulness. We saw that in verse 3, for instance. The husband must fulfill his duty to his wife. Likewise also the wife to her husband. Look at verse 5. He says, stop depriving one another. Stop it with the not having sex routine. That's a command. In other words, remember when we talked about this? You're supposed to have it regularly, consistently. See? Stop depriving one another, except by agreement for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Come together again. Well, what if he goes, no, I don't want to. No, I'm tired of this whole sex thing. Whatever the reason is. I mean, it has to be an illegitimate reason. It can't be that there's been some sort of physical issue, maybe even a mental situation that's stopped everything. Then you just need to be patient in regards to that. We're talking about a healthy couple, and he's just like, no. Or she's like, no, for whatever reason. I don't like having sex with you, kind of a routine. Well, the one who does that is the one that's in sin, because it's to be regular. And I've told you before that I've said to couples, in premarital counseling, you better be planning on having sex regularly, consistently. None of this, and it's between the two of you. You can agree, for sure. I mean, he can't be demanding, she can't be demanding, but there shouldn't be that you've got to get across. The relationship that God puts together is a couple that is thinking the same in this area. One of the ways you can know that you're going against the will of God is in this area. And so I tell couples, it's like, if you're not going to agree on something and be at peace with it, if you're going to be off, out of kilter, out of whack in this area, well, you better not be tying no knots. God isn't putting this together. That's one aspect, all right? So the marriage cannot be unbound unless, bang, like something like this happens. No, I don't want to have sex with you. Secondly, what if there's no sunyo dekeo? Verses 12 through 13, right? Remember that? Sunyo dekeo? That's where they think well together concerning what a marriage is. There has to be on both sides sunyo dekeo. Well, if there is no sunyo dekeo, if one of them doesn't think the same as the other, if one is holding a biblical understanding of what marriage is and the other one is not, there's no sunyo dekeo. And you know what that leads to, right? What does that lead to? Right, chorizo. Very good. Chorizo. That's where there is a division. that one, the husband or the wife, has chose to divide themselves from that other person. Divide themselves, and that could mean physically leaving, or the word can mean you could still be under the same roof at the same address, but you're divided over what a marriage is. He's gone, well, I think, I should be able to, have a little sex with somebody else on the side kind of a thing and still maintain my marriage with you. Yes, Jane and Bob, there are people out there that think that. Or other things, or I ought to be able to take, half of our income and I need to be able to go across the river and blow it on gambling and all that goes on, and I'll see you, at the end of the weekend kind of a thing. No, he is dividing himself from her, or her from him, as the case may be. These are the things that can break it, but it remains unbound unless these things take place. How about 4? She's no longer bound if he's unfaithful in regards to the exception clause. Remember in Matthew 19:9? Matthew 19:9, Jesus gives us the exception clause. It also shows up in Matthew 5:32, but 19:9 is a more contextually strong way to look at it. He says, "And I say unto you, whoever divorces his wife, except for porneos, and marries another woman, commits adultery." That's the exception clause. Well, porneos is not adultery. There's too many guys out there who think that porneos is adultery right there. 2 different Greek words. And, when Jesus said this, was the law still in effect? Hello? When Jesus says this, was the law still in effect? He hadn't gone to the cross yet to fulfill it, had he? Heaven and earth, the old covenant had not passed away yet, had it? Right? All right, so adultery, the penalty for adultery, or the reward for adultery, is you die. That's your reward. But not for porneos. But porneos can be all kinds of unfaithfulness, not necessarily always sexual unfaithfulness, which I don't want to, get back into all of that right now. So if he is unfaithful, porneos, if he divides himself, chorizo, from her concerning what Scripture states is a marriage, if he withholds sex from her in the marriage, I'm saying the guy in this case, if he is adulterous, Matthew 5:28 says if a man looks on a woman and lusts after her, he's committed adultery already with her in his heart. He doesn't have to actually physically make it happen. And this is the insidiousness of the internet. I'm going to say this every time. This is the insidiousness, easy access. I have never in my life, before the internet was around, I would occasionally counsel a couple concerning his problem with a Playboy magazine. Maybe Hustler magazine or something like that. But that's not even heard of it. I don't hear about that at all anymore. Now I'm hearing about, not in our congregation, this isn't happening in our congregation, but for many years since the internet, that's what I hear about now. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's what I hear about. And so the man, as it says in 39, a wife is bound as long as her husband lives, but if her husband is dead, she's free to be married to whom she wills. He is dead to her for all of these reasons, including physical death. Well, what if he does Matthew 5:28? Adultery via internet. He's dead. Now, can that be forgiven? Yes, that can be. Can there be reconciliation? Sure. Does there need to be counseling? Big time. Pastor, the elders need to know about it. They need to be aware of it. At least one does. Because a private sin is to remain private unless it is exposed. Obviously, then it's no longer private. A public sin is handled in a public manner. Okay. And so we look at verse 39, and we see that he says she is to be married to whom she wishes, but only in the Lord. The absolute criteria that governs the idea of she can marry whom she wishes is what? Only in the Lord. In other words, she's got to get married in the Lord, which is a New Testament statement for her prospective husband has to be in Christ. He's got to be a believer. She can't go out and marry a non-believer. That's an absolute there. In fact, 2 Corinthians 6:14 states that very strongly. Can't believe the amount of people out there that don't think this has anything to do with marriage. 2 Corinthians 6:14, Paul says, do not be bound together with unbelievers. Heterozygeo. It means to be mismatched, to be mismated. Do not be mismatched with unbelievers. What? The greatest matching is a marriage. Holy cow. And so on and so forth. Only in the Lord. Lastly, then, he says in verse 40, but in my opinion, she is happier if she remains as he is. Interesting, because over in 1 Timothy 5, verses 14 through 15, 1 Timothy 5, 14 through 15, Paul, speaking in the context of widows in the church at Ephesus, says that it's his will that the widows, the younger widows, get married. He says that straight up. The younger widows should get married. They should move on. In other words, what he's trying to do in that context, this is the beauty of context, because it looks like we got a contradiction going right here. Watch out when somebody tries to tell you, yeah, there are contradictions in the Bible, and here's one right here. In 1 Corinthians 7, 39 and 40, right? He says, stay single to the widow, right? But you go over to 1 Timothy 5, right? And it says, I want the widows to get married. Well, what's that? Well, that's you being an idiot because you don't know what a context is. That's what it is. Because over in 1 Timothy 5, he's describing how to deal with the widows in the church at Ephesus. And I'm so glad that Lynn read that this morning. You're shocked, brother? I pointed at you and Lynn's head went. I didn't know I had that kind of power. Wait, let's try it again. Oh, that was cool. Oh, my gosh. All right, so the widow's list is what's being talked about right there. All right. So in my opinion, she is happier if she remains as she is, and I think also that I have the Spirit of God. A little sarcasm at the end right there. The implication seems to be, that maybe Paul isn't in contact with the Spirit because, he holds a point of view that's different from our point of view. We can't really know, but it is interesting how he slaps that in at the end right there. Clearly somebody, was jagging on him about that. All right, let's conclude this now. Let's bring this to a conclusion. Let me give you 5 points to conclude with. That's better than 10, isn't it? Now, I can make it 10 right now off the top of my head if you'd like. You doing all right? Okay, here we go. I'll do fast. Number 1, male headship is the result of the fall and has never been set aside. Result of the fall. It's never been set aside. And so it continues on. That's where this is coming from. Headship and authority ultimately is a protection issue. I asked the Lord to put Joanna to sleep. Look at that. So mom and dad would be, able to listen. Thank you, Lord. Secondly, according to Numbers 30 and 1 Corinthians 7, 36 through 38, the father's authority remains as to who and when his daughter marries. It remains. So dads, you're on. If you've got a daughter in the house, young, one day will be of marriageable age, maybe is a marriageable age right now, you're on in this responsibility. Dad has the authority. He is the governing power. It just really freaks me out when I hear about situations, and 9 times out of 10, these Christian men have not had this teaching when they're doing something other than what the Word says, and they're just kind of letting it go. And it's like, well, I mean, I've had parents say to me, well, if the situation is bad, their daughter shouldn't be marrying this guy. And the parents of the daughter, they say to me, I kid you not, they say to me, well, they're just going to do it anyway. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Stop it. Get in there and stop it. You say no. Yes, but they're just going to do it anyway, and then they'll be mad at us, kind of a thing. Who are the parents here? What's going on? Why do you have to be so mad? Because you're being sinful. I kid you not. Do something. I cannot believe how afraid parents are of their children. They're afraid of them. And it's been that way for many years if you research it. No, this thing remains. Number 3, if the father says no to his daughter marrying at this time, it is from his heart, if he's following Scripture here. And guess what? It's a gift that he gives to his daughter so that she is not distracted from the Lord by a husband. That's what Paul is saying. Now, is that the case in every case? Now, don't go the other way on this. Well, my dad never offered me this gift, so I guess he didn't love me, kind of a thing, because he let me get married to him. Oh, I didn't. Yeah, I'm looking just generally. This is generally towards the wall, okay? No, don't be thinking that. Oh my gosh. But in certain cases, if he says no, I mean really, and he's paying attention to this word right here. He's taking into consideration, this is a beautiful gift for me to give to my daughter, to say no in the midst of something like this. And she'll be upset. She'll be upset. You know, I've shared with you how many times I said no to my oldest daughter. I said no to Janae, 3 times. I'm not kidding, man. I got yelled at one time. She was stomping out the door after I said no. And she was stomping out the front. I mean, I'll never forget this. Stomping out the front door. It's when we were living over on Center Street. 84th Street. And she goes stomping. Boom, boom, boom. She opens the door. And she goes, "You won't let me grow up." Bang, out the door, They're going to say all kinds of stuff to you. It's like this. It's here, and then it's here. You say what you can say when you need to say it. But there's going to be, and then later, guess what would happen? You go to her now, and you say, so what do you think about your dad saying no to those 3 guys? If you had married them now, as opposed to who you're married to now. And she would be, oh yeah. Sure. I had another one of my daughters who I tried to counsel in this, and this would be one that lives back in California. And I think I've mentioned this to you. And she wouldn't take my counsel. Well, she married the guy, and the whole thing went bad. There's kids as a result of this, and the guy ended up being nuts. She's been divorced from him for a while now, but the leftovers as a result of that. What is going on she'll be dealing with that for many, many years to come. And she has said to me, "Dad, I am so sorry. You were so right." And now she's like she's going the other way. When she's even thinks she's interested in a guy, she's calling me up. She's going, "Okay, here it is. His name is X, Y, and Z." And she knows what to look for, kind of a thing. And, be in prayer about this, Dad, kind of a thing. I think I kind of like him. And she's not real quick. She's not like running after some guy, you know what I'm saying? But this is where it's at right now. She's very careful in regards to these things. Now, fourthly, if the father says yes to the marriage, he knows that it's best for the daughter under those circumstances. Fifthly, then, I kind of like this. Did you notice that Paul concludes the subject in verse 40 in preference to the single life? Did you notice that? I think that since he concludes it that way, that we need to take into consideration that as a viable possibility, especially for our believing daughters. Not every time. But let's just at least hold that up before the Lord. Because you never know. God may surprise you and go, yeah, that's what I want for her. And it'll happen through the ministry of the Word, the internal witness of the Spirit. It'll happen through the witness of the elders. And that's how we'll know. And so Paul brings it to a close right now in regards to this subject. Now you tell me, chapter 7 is one wild ride, isn't it? I mean, there's things in here most people don't know anything about. Incredible. Lord, how glad we are to be able to embrace your word in regards to these things and the understanding that you give us, Lord, so that we're not all wondering about these subjects. Thank you for having Paul write these things. Thank you for preserving it in the Scriptures for us, O Lord. Thank you, Lord God, that you keep bringing these things back to our hearts and minds, and help us to restudy, to go over the notes and this kind of a thing, and pray over what you are saying here, especially as it relates to any of us in any of these circumstances. Thank you for your faithfulness, Lord, in showing us these things. I praise and thank you. Thank you for helping me, Lord, to get through this subject. And, of course, we've got a lot more to go, getting right into the 8th chapter next week by your grace, and many more subjects to cover right here. But this has really been some things that they hit home, Lord. They are in our living room, having to do with our personal desires, personal relationships, marriage, family, and this kind of a thing. So thank you, Lord, for all of this. And Lord, I ask now that as we take up the morning offering, Lord God, that as your people are enabled to give, Lord, bless them to be able to give in accordance with your will for them, and help them to know your will for them. And let us all, Lord God, rest. Let us actively rest in the fact that you are our provider and you will take care of us, Lord God. Thank you, Lord God, for the gifts of your people today. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.